Jacob Martin was working on his farm when he heard the noise. It was a sound like thunder, but the sky was clear. He looked up and saw ships. Dozens of them. They were coming down from space, dark and fast. Jacob had seen ships before, but never this many. Never ships that looked like weapons. He dropped his tools and ran toward the house. His wife Linda was hanging laundry in the backyard. She saw his face and knew something was wrong. "Get the kids," Jacob said. Now, Linda didn't ask questions. She ran inside and grabbed Katie and Ben. The children were young, only 8 and 6 years old. They didn't understand what was happening, but they knew their parents were scared. The bell in the village center started ringing. It was the emergency bell, the one they only used for tornadoes or fires. Jacob had never heard it ring like this, fast and desperate. Other families were running out of their houses, looking at the sky. The ships landed all around the village of Greenfield. They were huge, made of dark metal that seemed to drink in the light. The wheat fields that the farmers had worked so hard to grow were burning now, crushed under the weight of alien vessels. Jacob pushed his family toward the storm shelter behind their barn. It was just a hole in the ground with a metal door, meant to protect them from bad weather. He hoped it would be enough. "Stay here," he told Linda. "Lock the door. Don't come out until I come back." "Jacob, no," Linda said, but he was already running back toward the village center. Mayor Greg Foster was standing in the town square. He was an old man, had been mayor for 20 years. He always knew what to do. But now he looked lost. Around him, 200 people from Greenfield were gathering, confused and afraid. The aliens came out of their ships. They were tall, taller than any human, with scales that looked like armor. They walked on 2 legs but had tails that moved behind them like snakes. Their eyes were cold and yellow. One of them, bigger than the others, walked to the center of the square. A device on his chest spoke in English. "You are on sacred ground," the alien said. His voice was like rocks grinding together. "You must leave now." Greg stepped forward. He raised his hands to show he had no weapons. "We didn't know. This land was checked before we came here. If there's a problem, we can talk about it." "We can move." The alien's tail moved fast like a whip. One of the soldiers raised a weapon. There was a flash of light and heat. Greg fell down and didn't move again. People started screaming. Jacob turned and ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of weapons firing. He could hear people dying. His neighbors. His friends. He made it back to his farm and threw himself into the shelter. Linda pulled the door shut and locked it. They sat in the darkness, holding their children. Katie was crying. Ben was too scared to make any sound at all. The shelter shook. Explosions made the walls vibrate. Dust fell from the ceiling. They could hear the sounds of destruction above them, things breaking and burning. It went on for hours. Then it stopped. Jacob wanted to go outside and look, but Linda held his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Just wait." They waited all night. They waited all the next day. Finally, when Jacob couldn't stand it anymore, he opened the door. Greenfield was gone. Every building had been destroyed. The houses were piles of rubble. The school where Katie went every day was just a black spot on the ground. The church, the store, the town hall, all gone, and there were bodies. So many bodies. Jacob saw Mr. Peterson, who had taught him how to fix tractors. He saw Lucy Warren, the teacher. He saw children he had watched grow up. All dead. Linda came out of the shelter with the kids. She made a sound, something between a sob and a scream. Ben threw up. Katie just stared, her young face trying to understand something too terrible to understand. Other people started appearing. They came out of basements and hiding spots. They came from the fields where they had run when the shooting started. Jacob counted them. 37 people. That was all that was left. They gathered in what used to be the town square. Nobody knew what to say. Pete Johnson had blood running down his face from a cut on his head. Amy Fletcher was holding her arm, which was bent at a wrong angle. Old Henry Gibson was leaning on young Danny Cooper, barely able to stand. "What do we do?" someone asked. Jacob looked at all of them. These were his people, his community. They had trusted him, followed him to this shelter. Now they were looking at him for answers. He thought about Greg Foster trying to negotiate with his hands up. He thought about all the people who had died just trying to live peaceful lives. He thought about his children, who would have nightmares about this for the rest of their lives. "We survive," Jacob said. His voice was quiet, but everyone heard him. "First we survive. We take care of each other. We stay alive, and then Danny asked. He was only 16, but he looked older now. Jacob looked at the ruins around them. In the distance, he could see one of the alien ships. They had built something there on top of where Greenfield used to be. A building with strange symbols and lights. They had destroyed an entire village just to put up a building. Then we make them pay, Jacob said. I don't know how yet, but we will make them pay for this. The survivors started the hard work of staying alive. They searched through the ruins for supplies. They found food, water, tools. They found some medical supplies and what was left of Amy's veterinary clinic. They buried the dead, 203 graves in a field outside of town. They couldn't stay in Greenfield. The aliens had made it clear this land wasn't theirs anymore, so they walked 15 miles into the hills and started building again. They called the new place New Greenfield, though nobody really called it that. It was just the village. Jacob started reading everything he could about the aliens. They were called the Vothar. They had an empire, 47 star systems. They were warriors, strong and proud. They had laws that were thousands of years old. At night, when Linda and the kids were asleep, Jacob would sit and read. He learned the Vothar language. He learned their history. He learned how their government worked. He was looking for something, a weakness, a way to fight back, because Jacob had made a promise. Standing in the ruins of Greenfield, he had promised revenge, not just for himself, but for everyone who had died. For Greg Foster trying to negotiate. For Lucy Warren protecting her students. For all of them. He didn't have weapons. He didn't have an army. But he had time, and he had anger, and he had a brain that wouldn't stop working. Somewhere in all that alien law and tradition, there had to be a way. The Vothar thought the problem was solved. They thought they could destroy a human village and nobody would care. They were wrong. This was just the beginning. 2 years passed. The village grew slowly. They built simple houses and planted crops in the rocky soil. The land wasn't as good as before, but it was enough. 37 people could survive on not much. But surviving wasn't enough for Jacob. Every night after work, he studied. He had a small computer that had survived the attack. Traders came through New Montana sometimes, and Jacob traded food for information. Books about the Vothar, legal documents, historical records, anything he could get. Linda watched him work and worried. You're going to make yourself sick, she said one night. I'm fine, Jacob said, not looking up from his screen. You're not sleeping. You barely eat. The kids miss you. That made Jacob look up. Katie and Ben were 10 and 8 now. They had learned to live with the nightmares. They had learned to be careful and quiet. But they were still children. They still needed their father. I know, Jacob said. I'm sorry. But Linda, I found something. He turned the computer so she could see. It was a long document in the Vothar language, but Jacob had learned to read it. This is their law, he said. Specifically, it's about something called a blood mark. When a Vothar clan kills someone from another species without proper cause, it creates a legal debt. The victims can demand payment. Linda sat down next to him. What kind of payment? That's the interesting part. It can be money. It can be land. It can be political power. The law doesn't specify. It just says the debt must be balanced in a way that restores honor. So we could sue them? Not exactly sue. Challenge. We would have to prove they killed our people without proper cause, and we would have to do it in their courts by their rules. Linda was quiet for a long time. How long would something like that take? Years, maybe 10 years. Maybe more. We would have to become experts in their laws. We would have to build relationships with other Vothar who might help us. We would have to be patient. 10 years, Linda said softly. She looked at Jacob's face, saw the determination there. You really think we can do this? I think we have to try. What else do we have? We can't fight them with guns. We don't have ships or soldiers. But maybe, just maybe, we can beat them with their own laws. Jacob called a meeting with the village council. It wasn't really a formal thing. Just the people who had naturally become leaders. Pete Johnson, who organized the food supplies. Amy Fletcher, who had learned to be their doctor even though she had been a veterinarian. And Danny Cooper, who at 18 was smart and quick to learn. Jacob explained what he had found. He showed them the laws, explained what a blood mark was, told them his plan. It's going to take a long time, he said. We'll have to work in secret. We'll have to learn everything about how the Vothar government works. Some of us might have to leave New Montana to gather information. I'll go, Danny said immediately. I can learn their legal system. I'm young. I can spend years on this. Pete nodded slowly. I've got contacts with traders. I can gather intelligence about the Vothar clans, find out which ones might be sympathetic. Amy looked thoughtful. I should study their culture, their biology. If we're going to navigate their system, we need to understand how they think. One by one, the others agreed. It was a long shot, maybe an impossible shot, but it was better than doing nothing. It was better than letting the massacre of Greenfield go unanswered. Over the next 5 years, New Greenfield became more than a village. On the surface, it looked like any other frontier settlement. People farmed, raised animals, traded with passing ships, but underneath, they were building a network. Danny left for a Vothar world called Keth, where young aliens from different species could study law and politics. It was expensive, but the village pooled their money. Danny sent back regular reports. He was learning the legal codes, memorizing thousands of cases and precedents. Katie, now 15, asked to go study on a human diplomatic station. She wanted to learn how to negotiate, how to speak in public, how to convince people. Jacob was reluctant to let her go, but Linda argued that they needed to train the next generation. This isn't going to be resolved in our lifetime, Linda said. The kids need to be ready to carry it on. She was right. Jacob agreed and Katie left. Ben wanted to go too, but he was still too young. Instead, he stayed and helped his father research, learning everything he could about Vothar politics. The information started coming in slowly, then faster. Pete's trader contacts told him about conflicts between the Vothar clans. The 3 ruling clans, Bloodscale, Ironcrest, and Shadowfang, competed constantly for power. They followed elaborate rules of honor and prestige. They could be played against each other. Amy traveled to a medical conference on a neutral world and met Vothar doctors who were frustrated with their government's corruption. She learned that not all Vothar supported the clan system. There were reformers, especially among the younger generation. Jacob organized everything. He built a database of information. Which clan leaders were honorable, which were corrupt, which Vothar officials might be sympathetic to humans, what trade routes they used, what resources they needed, what political pressures they faced. New Greenfield became the center of a knowledge network that stretched across dozens of worlds. No one knew about it except the villagers. To the outside galaxy, they were just farmers trying to survive, but they were so much more. Then 5 years into their research, Katie made a discovery. She was back visiting from her studies, now 20 years old and sharp as a knife. She had been going through geological surveys of the old Greenfield site, comparing them to Vothar historical records. "Dad," she said one evening, her voice shaking, "the shrine isn't real." Jacob looked up from his work. "What?" "The shrine they built on Greenfield. The one they said was sacred ground. It's not ancient. The foundation materials date to just 3 months before the attack. The construction techniques are modern, and there's no mention of any shrine in that location in any historical record from before we settled there." Jacob felt his heart start to beat faster. "Are you sure?" "I've checked it 5 times. I had Amy look at the geological data. I had Danny review the legal precedents. Dad, they made it up. They fabricated the whole thing. There was never any sacred ground. They just wanted our land and used religion as an excuse." Jacob stood up and walked to the window. Outside, New Greenfield was quiet in the evening light. 37 people had survived the massacre. 37 people had spent 7 years preparing for this moment. Under Vothar law, Jacob said slowly, fabricating a religious claim to justify violence is one of the worst crimes a clan can commit. The penalty is severe: loss of territory, loss of authority, loss of honor. "We can prove it," Katie said. "I have all the documentation. Geological surveys, carbon dating, construction analysis. We can prove they lied." Jacob turned to look at his daughter. She had been 8 years old when Greenfield burned. Now she was a woman, educated and determined. "Ready to fight? Then it's time," Jacob said. "We file our challenge." The village gathered that night. All 37 survivors, plus some of their children who had been born after the massacre. Jacob stood in front of them and explained what Katie had found. "This is what we've been working toward," he said. "We have proof that the Vothar lied. We have grounds for a bloodmark challenge. If we do this, there's no going back. We'll be challenging one of the most powerful clans in the Vothar Dominion." "What if we lose?" someone asked. "Then we lose," Jacob said simply. "But we'll have tried. We'll have stood up and demanded justice for what happened here. That's more than most people get." Pete stood up. I say we do it. We've come this far, Amy nodded. Agreed. Let's finish what we started. One by one, they all agreed. Even the children who didn't fully understand voted yes. Because this was their community, their family. This was about more than revenge now. It was about showing the galaxy that humans didn't just disappear when you tried to destroy them. Danny started preparing the legal documents. Katie began gathering all the evidence into a format the Vothar courts would accept. Pete reached out to his contacts to warn them something big was coming. Jacob sat with Linda that night after everyone else had gone home. Are you scared? She asked. Terrified, Jacob admitted. We're about to challenge a warrior clan that could destroy us all with one ship. We're betting everything on the idea that they care more about their laws than their pride. Linda took his hand. Remember what you said 7 years ago? In the ruins of Greenfield? You said we survive and then we make them pay. We've survived. Now it's time for the second part. Jacob squeezed her hand. In the morning, they would start the process. They would file their challenge with the Galactic Council. They would begin a legal battle that could take years. But tonight he let himself remember. He remembered Greenfield before the attack. The sound of children playing. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery. The way the sun looked on the wheat fields. All of that was gone. But the memory lived on, and now, finally, they had a chance to make those memories mean something. The Vothar had made a mistake when they destroyed Greenfield. They had thought humans were weak, unimportant, easy to brush aside. They were about to learn differently. The Galactic Council chamber was the biggest room Katie had ever seen. It was built to hold representatives from 10,000 different species. The ceiling showed a map of the entire galaxy, with little lights for every star system. The walls were made of something that looked like crystal but was stronger than metal. Katie walked into that room with her father beside her, and she felt very small, but she didn't let anyone see that fear. She wore simple clothes, the kind her mother had worn when Greenfield burned. She carried a data crystal with all their evidence, and she had practiced what she was going to say 1,000 times. The 3 Vothar clan leaders sat on high platforms. Warlord Kresh of the Bloodscale clan, the one who had ordered the attack on Greenfield, Commander Voth of the Iron Crest clan, who everyone said followed the old laws strictly, and Chieftain Sarax of the Shadow Fang clan, who was known for being clever and political. Katie walked to the speaking platform. Her hands wanted to shake, but she didn't let them. Behind her, she could feel her father's presence, steady and sure. High Clan Council, Katie said. Her voice was clear and loud. I am Katie Martin, daughter of Jacob Martin. I represent the survivors of the Greenfield settlement on New Montana. I come to issue a formal challenge under Article 47 of the Vothar Legal Codex. There was a sound like wind through the chamber, thousands of aliens shifting, whispering, surprised. Warlord Kresh's scales turned dark, which Katie had learned meant anger. This is ridiculous. The humans have no standing to challenge a clan decision. Article 47 gives standing to any victim of clan violence, Katie said. She had memorized this part. Furthermore, I have evidence that the Bloodscale clan fabricated the reason for that violence. The Sacred Ground claim was false. The Shrine of the First Flame was built after human settlement, not before. She uploaded her data crystal to the chamber's main display. Images appeared, huge and clear for everyone to see. Geological surveys showing soil composition. Carbon dating results proving the shrine was only a few years old. Communications between Bloodscale officials discussing how to remove the humans weeks before they mentioned any sacred ground. There was chaos in the chamber now. Aliens of 100 different species were talking, pointing, arguing. Katie stood still and let them see the evidence. Commander Voth leaned forward, his yellow eyes fixed on the displays. These documents, if they are real, would be a serious violation of honor law. They are real, said a new voice. Katie had been waiting for this moment. A Vothar in long robes walked into the chamber. This was Scholar Drax, a historian who Danny had spent 3 years befriending. Danny had slowly fed him information, earned his trust, and now Drax was willing to speak the truth. I have checked every source, Scholar Drax said. I have examined the geological data, the construction records, the historical archives. The human is correct. There was no ancient shrine in that location. The Bloodscale clan built it after they decided to remove the human settlement. Warlord Kresh stood up from his platform. This is a conspiracy. The humans have paid this scholar to lie, Chieftain Sarak spoke for the first time, his voice soft, but everyone heard it. Be careful, Warlord. To accuse a scholar of corruption is itself a serious charge. Do you have evidence? Kresh didn't answer. He couldn't. Under Vothar law, making an accusation without proof was almost as bad as the original crime. Commander Voth raised one clawed hand for silence. The chamber went quiet. The challenge has merit, Voth said. Under Article 47, when evidence of false justification is presented, a full tribunal must be held. The Bloodscale clan will answer these accusations. Katie felt her father's hand on her shoulder just for a second. They had done it. They had gotten past the first barrier. The Vothar were going to hold a trial. The tribunal took 6 months. It wasn't like a human trial with a jury and a judge. Instead, it was a series of formal debates and evidence presentations. Katie, Danny, and others from New Greenfield took turns presenting their case. They brought in experts. They showed documents. They proved piece by piece that the Bloodscale clan had lied. The Vothar public watched everything. It was broadcast across their empire. Here was a human, young and small compared to the mighty Vothar, using their own sacred laws to challenge a warlord. Some Vothar thought it was brave. Others thought it was insulting. But everyone watched. Warlord Kresh tried to fight back. He brought in his own experts who said the evidence was fake. He claimed the humans had destroyed the ancient shrine themselves. He argued that even if the shrine was new, there had been an older one that was destroyed centuries ago. But Katie and her team had prepared for everything. Every argument Kresh made, they had a counter-argument. Every witness he brought, they found another witness who disagreed. They had spent 7 years learning Vothar law. Kresh had spent those years assuming he would never be challenged. Danny was brilliant in the legal debates. He could quote precedents from memory. He understood the complex web of Vothar honor law better than most Vothar did. When Kresh's lawyers tried to use technical arguments to dismiss the case, Danny blocked them with older, more sacred laws that couldn't be ignored. The Vothar people started to turn against Kresh, not all of them, but enough. They began to see that their warlord had lied, had broken sacred law. Some Vothar started to question other things their leaders had done. If Kresh could lie about this, what else might be false? Finally, after 6 months, the tribunal reached its verdict. Katie stood in the council chamber again. This time she wasn't alone. Jacob was beside her, and Danny and Pete and Amy. Other survivors from Greenfield had come, traveling across space to be here for this moment. Commander Voth read the decision. His voice was formal, but Katie thought she heard respect in it. The tribunal finds that Warlord Kresh of the Bloodscale clan did knowingly and deliberately fabricate religious justification for violence. 203 civilians were killed based on false claims. This is a grave violation of honor law, a blood mark that cannot be ignored. Warlord Kresh's scales had turned completely white. In Vothar body language, that meant shame and shock. The Bloodscale clan is stripped of all territorial holdings on New Montana, Voth continued. Furthermore, as payment for the blood mark, the human survivors are granted legal authority over the Bloodscale Administrative Center on Voth Prime. This authority will continue until the blood debt is considered satisfied, according to traditional law. For a moment, Katie didn't understand what she had heard. Then it hit her. They had won. More than won. They had been given control of a Vothar city, a whole planet. The council chamber erupted in noise. Some species were cheering. Others were shouting in protest. The Vothar representatives were arguing among themselves. It was chaos. Jacob pulled Katie into a hug. You did it, he whispered. You actually did it. Katie pulled back and looked at her father. He was crying. She had never seen him cry before, not even when Greenfield burned, but now tears ran down his face. We all did it, Katie said. Everyone from the village. This is for all of them. Pete was laughing and crying at the same time. Amy was hugging Danny, who looked stunned. Around them, the chamber was still in chaos, but Katie didn't care. They had come here as victims, survivors of a massacre that the galaxy had ignored. They were leaving as something else, as people who had beaten a warrior empire at its own game. But as the reality sank in, Katie started to understand what came next. They had been given control of a Vothar city. Millions of Vothar lived there, and they would not be happy about being governed by humans. This wasn't the end of their struggle. In some ways, it was just the beginning. That night, Katie couldn't sleep. She stood on the observation deck of their ship, looking out at the stars. Her father came and stood beside her. Having second thoughts? Jacob asked. We asked for justice, Katie said. We got a city. What are we supposed to do with a city? Govern it fairly, Jacob said. Show them that humans can be better rulers than their own warlords were. Turn this from revenge into something positive. That's a lot harder than winning a legal case. Yes, Jacob agreed. But you've never been afraid of hard work. None of us have. Katie thought about Greenfield, about the people who had died, about the village that had rebuilt and survived, about 7 years of patient preparation for this moment. Okay, she said. We'll try. We'll show them what good governance looks like. That's my girl, Jacob said. Below them, the ship was turning toward Voth Prime, toward their new home and their new responsibility, toward the next chapter in a story that had started with fire and death but was becoming something else. Something that might change the galaxy. The survivors of Greenfield were about to become the rulers of their enemy's capital, and the Vothar who had destroyed their village were about to learn what humans were really capable of when they refused to give up. The city of Kreshtar was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Buildings made of dark crystal reached toward the sky. Vehicles flew through the air on paths Katie couldn't see. And everywhere there were Vothar. Millions of them, all staring at the humans who had come to rule them. When Katie's ship landed at the government complex, she was met by protests. Thousands of Vothar lined the streets, their scales dark with anger. They held signs written in their language, but Katie had learned to read it. The signs said things like humans go home and death to the invaders. Well, Danny said beside her, trying to sound brave, at least they showed up to meet us. The government building was huge, designed to make visitors feel small. Everything about it said power and strength. Katie walked through corridors lined with guards, Vothar soldiers whose scales showed they were neutral, not loyal to the Bloodscale clan. The administrative offices were in chaos. The Bloodscale clan had left when they lost control, and they had taken all the experienced managers with them. Only junior officials remained, and most of them didn't know how anything worked. Some wouldn't even talk to the humans. Pete took charge of the infrastructure systems. On his second day, he came to Katie looking exhausted. The water treatment system is about to fail, he said. I need parts and I need people who know how it works. But nobody will help me. They either ignore me or give me wrong information on purpose. Katie called a meeting with the core team from Greenfield. They sat around a large table in what used to be Warlord Kresh's private office. We're not going to win by demanding obedience, Katie said. The Vothar respect strength, but they also respect honor and fairness. We need to show them we're not here to punish them. We're here to govern properly. Ben, who was now 24 and in charge of civil services, nodded. How do we do that? They hate us. Katie pulled up a map of the city. Look at this area, North Kresh. The records show it's been underfunded for decades. The infrastructure is falling apart. Schools are overcrowded. The people there are mostly lower caste, so the Bloodscale leadership ignored them. So we fix it, Danny said, understanding. We show them that human rule means everyone gets treated fairly, not just the elites. Exactly. We use Vothar workers, pay them fairly, and make visible improvements to their lives. Actions speak louder than words. It was a risk. Some people might see it as weakness. But Katie remembered what her father had taught her. You beat the Vothar by being smarter, not stronger. They started small. Katie authorized repairs to a water treatment plant in North Kresh. She hired local Vothar engineers and paid them good wages. At first, the workers were suspicious and hostile. But the money was real, and the work needed doing. When a school collapsed in another poor district, Katie had it rebuilt immediately. She used modern safety standards and included features the old building never had. A library, a real cafeteria, equipment for science classes. Ben reorganized the food distribution system. Under Bloodscale rule, it had been based on caste and clan connections. If you weren't important, you waited longer and got worse food. Ben changed it to a simple system based on need and efficiency. Everyone was treated the same. Slowly, things began to change. The protests got smaller. Some Vothar started to notice that their neighborhoods were getting better, not worse. Water was cleaner. Streets were repaired. Schools had supplies. Katie did something else that was radical. She started holding open forums where ordinary Vothar could complain directly to the government. In Vothar culture, leaders didn't talk to common people. The idea was shocking. The first forum was almost a disaster. Hundreds of angry Vothar showed up expecting speeches and ceremony. Instead, Katie sat on a simple chair and said, "Tell me what's wrong." "I'm listening." At first, nobody spoke. Then one Vothar, braver than the others, stood up and started shouting about unfair taxes. Instead of having him removed, Katie took notes. She asked questions. She promised to look into it. Others started talking. For 6 hours, Katie sat and listened to complaints. Some were about real problems. Some were just angry people who wanted to yell. But she listened to all of them. Then she did something even more shocking. She fixed the problems. The merchant who complained about unfair taxes found that the tax laws were changed within a week. A family that reported contaminated water had inspectors at their house the next day. Teachers who asked for better supplies got them. The Vothar people began to realize that this human actually cared about doing the job right. Not everyone was happy. There were still protests. Some Vothar thought the whole thing was a humiliation. The Bloodscale clan sent agents to cause trouble, sabotaging systems and spreading lies. But Katie's team was ready for that. They caught the saboteurs and exposed them publicly. 6 months after taking control, Katie got an unexpected visit. A group of Vothar civilians asked for a meeting. They were led by an older Vothar named Threx, who was respected in the community. Katie met them in a simple conference room, not the fancy throne room that Kresh had used. "Administrator Martin," Threx said formally. His scales were showing a neutral color, which meant he wasn't trying to threaten or challenge. "We have come to discuss something important." "I'm listening," Katie said. Threx looked at the others in his group, then back at Katie. "Under your rule, things have improved. Streets are cleaner. Water is safe. Schools are funded. The police don't demand bribes anymore. These are things we never had under the Bloodscale clan." Katie waited. This was leading somewhere. "Many of us have been talking," Threx continued. "The tribunal said you would rule until the blood debt is satisfied. That means eventually control will return to the Bloodscale clan. We don't want that." Katie sat up straighter. "What are you saying?" "Vothar law allows for territorial petitions. If enough citizens formally request a change in government, the High Council must consider it. We want to hold a vote. Let the people of Voth Prime choose whether to stay under human administration or return to clan rule." Danny, who was sitting beside Katie, leaned forward. "That would essentially be secession from the Bloodscale clan. Do you understand what you're asking?" "We understand perfectly," Threx said. "For the first time in our lives, we have a government that actually serves us instead of robbing us. Why would we want to go back?" Katie stood and walked to the window. Outside, she could see Kreshatar spreading out below. Millions of Vothar living their lives. She had come here expecting to stay a few years, make some reforms, and leave. Now they were asking her to stay permanently. "If we do this," Katie said, "it will cause huge problems. The other clans won't accept it easily. There could be political consequences across the entire Dominion." "Perhaps," Threx said, "but it is our right under the law, and we choose to exercise that right." Katie looked at her team. Pete, who had rebuilt the infrastructure. Amy, who had set up new health clinics. Danny, who had navigated impossible legal challenges. Ben, who had made sure everyone got fed fairly. They had come here for justice. For revenge, maybe. But somewhere along the way, they had started actually caring about the job, about making things better. "All right," Katie said. "If you want a referendum, we'll hold a referendum. But it has to be done properly. Fair voting, no intimidation, no corruption. If the people choose to stay under human administration, it has to be their real choice." Threx's scales shifted to a pleased blue color. "That is all we ask." After the Vothar delegation left, Katie sat with her father, who had arrived from New Montana for a visit. "You know what this means," Jacob said. "If Voth Prime votes to stay under human control, other Vothar worlds might want the same thing. You could trigger a wave of reform across their entire empire." "I know," Katie said. "Is that wrong? We came here to punish them for Greenfield." "No," Jacob said gently. "We came here to make them pay. But payment doesn't have to mean revenge. Maybe the best way to honor the people who died is to make sure their sacrifice meant something. If we can change the Vothar Empire into something better, something fairer, that's worth more than any revenge." Katie thought about Greenfield, about the village that had burned, about 200 people who had died for no good reason. They couldn't bring those people back. but maybe they could make sure it never happened again. Okay, she said. Let's hold a vote. Let's see if we can actually do this. The announcement went out the next day. For the first time in Vothar history, ordinary citizens would vote on who governed them. The galaxy was watching, and Katie knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The announcement of the referendum caused an explosion across Vothar space. For thousands of years, the Vothar had been ruled by clans. Leaders were chosen by strength and bloodline, not by popular vote. The idea that common citizens could decide their own government was shocking and dangerous. The Bloodscale clan was furious. They had already been humiliated by losing the tribunal. Now they faced the possibility of losing an entire planet permanently. They fought back hard. Propaganda flooded Voth Prime. Messages claiming the humans were manipulating the population. Videos showing Vothar culture being destroyed. Speeches saying that voting for human rule was a betrayal of their species. The Bloodscale clan spent enormous amounts of money trying to turn public opinion. They also sent saboteurs. One night, 3 major power plants failed at the same time. The city went dark. Katie's team worked through the night to get them running again. And when they did, they found evidence that the failures were deliberate. Bloodscale agents had planted devices to cause the breakdowns. Katie held a press conference the next morning. She showed the evidence publicly. She named the Bloodscale operatives who had been caught, and she said something that surprised everyone. The Bloodscale clan is afraid, Katie said. They're afraid that if you vote freely, you'll reject them. And they're right to be afraid, because they know that for decades they've been taking from you without giving back. They've been corrupt and you've known it. Now they're trying to make you afraid of change. Don't let them. The sabotage attempts continued, but each time Katie's team was ready. They had learned to think like the Bloodscale clan. They knew what tricks would be tried, and every time they caught and exposed an agent, more Vothar citizens started to trust the human administration. Commander Voth of the Iron Crest clan made a public statement supporting the referendum. He said that territorial petitions were legal and traditional, and that the vote should be respected. That was huge. One of the 3 ruling clan leaders was essentially supporting human rule. Chieftain Serac stayed neutral, but Katie noticed he wasn't supporting the Bloodscale clan either. He was watching, waiting to see which way things would go. 3 weeks before the vote, Katie got a death threat. A message was delivered to her office saying that if the referendum wasn't canceled, she would be killed. It was specific and detailed, describing where she lived and what route she took to work. Pete wanted to increase security. Ben wanted to postpone the vote, but Katie refused. If we show fear, we lose, she said. The Bloodscale clan is desperate. That means we're winning. She did accept some extra security, but she kept to her regular schedule. She continued holding public forums. She kept making improvements to the city. She acted like the threats didn't exist. The Vothar population noticed. They saw a human who could have hidden but chose to stand in the open. In Vothar culture, courage was respected above almost everything. Katie's refusal to be intimidated earned her more support than any speech could have. The other 2 high clan leaders also noticed. Commander Voth made another statement, this time condemning threats of violence against officials. Chieftain Serac finally broke his silence, saying that the referendum should proceed peacefully and that all sides should respect the outcome. The Bloodscale clan was isolated, and everyone could see it. Voting day arrived. Katie woke up early and couldn't eat breakfast. Her stomach was too tight with nervousness. This was it. After 8 years of work, after everything they had done, it came down to today. Voting stations opened across Voth Prime. The Galactic Council had sent observers to make sure everything was fair. News organizations from dozens of species were broadcasting the event. Katie spent the day visiting polling stations. She saw young Vothar voting for the first time in their lives. She saw elderly citizens who never thought they would have a voice in government. She saw families discussing politics together, choosing their future. At one station, an old Vothar female approached her. Her scales were pale with age and she moved slowly. Administrator Martin, the old Vothar, said, I want to thank you. For what? Katie asked. For caring. The Bloodscale clan never cared what happened to us. We were just tools to them. But you actually listen. You fix things. You treat us like we matter. The old Vothar reached out and touched Katie's hand, which was a sign of deep respect in Vothar culture. Whatever happens today, she said, You have already changed us. We will remember that a human showed us what good government looks like." Katie felt tears in her eyes. She had come to Voth Prime thinking about justice and revenge, but somewhere along the way it had become about something bigger. About showing that different species could work together. About proving that fair governance mattered more than who was in charge. The polls closed at sunset. Katie returned to the government complex with her team. They gathered in a conference room with computer screens showing results as they came in. The first districts to report were from the wealthy areas. These were the Vothar who had done well under clan rule. The numbers were close but slightly against human administration. "Don't worry," Danny said. "Those are the elite areas. Wait for the working districts." He was right. As results came in from North Kresh and other poor neighborhoods, the numbers shifted dramatically. These areas voted overwhelmingly to keep human rule. Pete was calculating percentages on his computer. "If this trend continues, we're going to win, maybe by a large margin." But Katie didn't let herself believe it yet. She had learned to be careful about hope. More results came in. Middle-class districts, industrial zones, suburban areas, all voting to stay under human administration. The margin was growing. By midnight, it was clear. 73% of Voth Prime's population had voted to petition for permanent human governance. Only 27% wanted to return to blood-scale control. The room erupted in cheers. Pete was hugging Amy. Ben was shouting with joy. Danny had his head in his hands, overwhelmed. Jacob, who had stayed for the vote, came over and put his arms around Katie. "You did it," he said quietly. "You really did it." Katie couldn't speak. She just held on to her father and let the tears come. 8 years ago, she had been a girl hiding in a storm shelter while her world burned. Now she had just won an election on an alien planet light years from home. The implications were enormous. Voth Prime would officially petition the Galactic Council to separate from blood-scale control. The High Council would have to approve it, but with 73% support, they couldn't refuse. It would set a precedent across Vothar space. Already, news was spreading. On 3 other Vothar worlds, reform movements were growing. Citizens were asking why they couldn't vote for their leaders too. The rigid clan system that had governed the Vothar for thousands of years was starting to crack. The next morning, Katie held a press conference. Reporters from across the galaxy were there, all wanting to know what happened. "The people of Voth Prime have spoken," Katie said. "They chose fair governance over corruption. They chose accountability over clan privilege. This isn't about humans ruling Vothar. It's about everyone deserving a government that serves them." A reporter asked, "What do you say to those who claim this is an insult to Vothar culture?" Katie thought carefully before answering. "The Vothar have an ancient and proud culture. I respect that deeply. But every culture can improve. The Vothar themselves voted for change." "That's not an insult. That's growth." Another reporter asked, "What's next for you?" Katie looked at her team standing behind her. Pete, Amy, Danny, Ben, the survivors of Greenfield who had turned tragedy into transformation. "We govern," Katie said simply. "We do the job we were chosen to do. We prove that this wasn't just about winning a vote. It's about building something better." That night, Katie stood on the balcony of the government complex looking out at Kreshtar. The city lights sparkled in the darkness. Millions of Vothar were down there, going about their lives under a government they had chosen. She thought about Greenfield, about the village that had burned, about Mayor Greg Foster trying to negotiate peace, about all the people who had died. They couldn't bring those people back. The pain of that loss would never completely go away, but their deaths had meant something. That small village had sparked a movement that was changing the galaxy. The Vothar who had destroyed Greenfield now lived under the governance of its survivors. But more importantly, they had learned that power didn't just come from weapons and strength. It came from justice, fairness, and the courage to stand up for what was right. Katie heard footsteps behind her. Her father joined her on the balcony. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked. "I'm thinking that we did something impossible," Katie said. "We took the worst thing that ever happened to us and turned it into something good." "Yes," Jacob agreed. "But the work isn't done. Governing is harder than winning elections. Now you have to prove that you can actually make this work long term." Katie smiled. "I know, but if we could do everything we've done so far, we can do this too." They stood together in silence, father and daughter, looking out at the city they now led. The galaxy was changing, and it had all started with 37 survivors who refused to give up. 5 years had passed since the referendum. Katie stood in the Galactic Council chamber once again, but this time she wasn't there to issue a challenge. She was there as the official representative of the Voth Prime Federation, a group of 4 Vothar worlds that had followed Voth Prime's example and adopted human-style democratic governance. The chamber looked different now. The Bloodscale clan's seats were mostly empty. After losing Voth Prime and 3 other worlds, the clan had collapsed. Some of its members had joined other clans. Some had retired in shame. Warlord Kresh himself had died, his name forever marked with dishonor. Katie walked to her seat among the council representatives. She was 30 years old now, no longer the young woman who had nervously presented evidence against a warlord. She was a respected voice in galactic politics, someone other species listened to when she spoke. But today, she wasn't speaking, she was listening. A delegation from a Vothar world called Draxnor had come to petition for reform. Their world was ruled by the Iron Crest clan, and while Commander Voth had been more reasonable than most clan leaders, the people still wanted change. They wanted to vote for their leaders like Voth Prime did. Katie watched as the young Vothar representative made his case. He was nervous, just like she had been years ago, but he was brave. He presented evidence of corruption, of unfair laws, of people suffering under a system that didn't serve them. Commander Voth listened carefully. He was old now, his scales fading with age. When the Vothar representative finished, Voth spoke. "I have watched the Voth Prime Federation for 5 years," Voth said. "I have seen their economy grow. I have seen their people prosper. I have seen corruption decrease and happiness increase. The evidence is clear that democratic reform works." The chamber went silent. This was huge. Commander Voth was one of the most traditional Vothar leaders. If he supported reform, it would change everything. Therefore, Voth continued, "I will not oppose this petition. If the people of Draxnor wish to vote for their government, I will allow it. But I make one condition." Everyone waited. "I will run in that election," Voth said. "I believe I have governed fairly. Let the people decide if that is true. If they choose someone else, I will step down with honor." "But I will not simply surrender power." "I will earn the right to keep it," Katie smiled. That was smart. Voth was acknowledging change while also giving himself a chance to stay in power. And honestly, he might win. He had been a better leader than most. After the council session, Katie found her father in an observation lounge. Jacob was 77 now, his hair completely white, but his mind was still sharp. "That went well," Jacob said as Katie sat down beside him. "Better than I expected. If Voth allows democratic elections on his worlds, the other clans will have to follow. The whole Vothar Empire is going to transform." And it all started with 37 people in a storm shelter. Jacob said quietly. Katie took her father's hand. "Dad, I want to go home." Jacob looked at her in surprise. "To New Montana?" "Yes, I've been away for 12 years. I've done what I needed to do here. Voth Prime has stable governance now. The Federation is running well. It's time for the next generation to take over. I want to go home to the village." Jacob smiled. "Linda will be happy. She's been asking when you'll visit for years." "Not visit, stay. I'm tired, Dad. I want to live somewhere quiet. I want to see the place where this all started." They left Voth Prime a month later. Katie appointed Danny as her successor. He had earned it. He knew Vothar law better than anyone, and had proven himself as a fair administrator. The Vothar people trusted him. The journey back to New Montana took 2 weeks. When their ship finally entered orbit, Katie felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. New Greenfield looked almost the same. The village had grown some, maybe 100 people now. But it was still small, still quiet. The houses were simple. The farms were modest. It was everything Kreshitar wasn't. Linda was waiting at the landing pad. She was in her 70s too, but she still stood straight and strong. She hugged Katie for a long time without saying anything. Ben had come home years earlier. He was married now with 2 children. He ran a farm on the edge of the village. Pete and Amy had stayed on Voth Prime, but they sent messages regularly. That night, the village held a gathering. Everyone came, including some of the children who had been born after the massacre. They sat around a fire and talked about old times. "Tell us about the trial," one of the young people asked Katie. "Tell us how you beat the warlord." Katie started to tell the story, but her father interrupted. "It wasn't just Katie," Jacob said. "It was all of us. Every person in this village played a part. Some gathered information, some studied law, some raised children who would carry on the work. We did it together. He looked around at the faces in the firelight. That's what I want you all to remember. We were just farmers. We had no weapons, no ships, no power. But we had each other, and we had patience, and we refused to give up. That's what made the difference. An older woman named Claire, one of the original 37 survivors, spoke up. I think about the people we lost sometimes. All those folks who died in Greenfield. Do you think they would be proud of what we did? The fire crackled in the silence that followed. I think, Katie said slowly, that they would be amazed. We turned their deaths into something that changed the galaxy. We didn't just get revenge. We created something better. That has to mean something, Jacob nodded. We can't bring them back. But we made sure their deaths weren't meaningless. That's the best we could do. The gathering broke up late. Katie walked with her parents back to their house. It was the same house they had lived in before, rebuilt on the same spot. Linda had kept Katie's old room exactly as it had been. Katie lay in her childhood bed and looked at the ceiling. She had slept in fancy rooms on a dozen worlds. She had governed a planet of millions. But this simple room felt more like home than anywhere else. The next morning, Katie started a new routine. She worked on the farm with Ben. She helped teach at the village school. She lived a quiet life, but she also wrote. She spent hours each day documenting everything that had happened. The massacre, the preparation, the trial, the governance of Voth Prime. She wrote it all down in simple language so that anyone could understand. Why are you doing that? Linda asked one day. Because other people need to know this story, Katie said. Not just the dramatic parts. The hard parts, too. The years of patient work. The times we wanted to give up. The small victories that led to big changes. Other species facing injustice need to know that it's possible to fight back, even when you're weak. The book took her 2 years to write. When it was finished, she sent it to publishers across the galaxy. It became one of the most widely read books in known space. Millions of beings read about the village that had defeated an empire with law books instead of weapons. Reform movements started on other worlds, inspired by the story. Not just both our worlds, but planets ruled by other species too. Everywhere, people who had thought change was impossible started to believe it could happen. 10 years after returning to New Montana, Katie received a message. It was from the Galactic Council. They wanted to give her an award for her contributions to galactic peace and justice. She didn't go to the ceremony. She sent a message instead. The real heroes are the people who died in Greenfield, her message said. I just tried to make their deaths mean something. If you want to honor anyone, honor them. Remember that even the smallest community matters. Remember that justice is worth fighting for, even when it takes decades. And remember that sometimes the best revenge is building something better. Jacob died peacefully in his sleep at age 85. The whole village came to his funeral. So did representatives from Voth Prime, and from the other Federation worlds, and from species across the galaxy who had heard his story. Katie spoke at the service. My father taught me that survival isn't enough. You have to do something with that survival. You have to make it matter. He took the worst day of his life and spent the rest of his years making sure it led to something good. That's the legacy he leaves us. Linda lived another 5 years after Jacob. On her last day, she held Katie's hand and smiled. We did good, Linda whispered. All of us. We took something broken and made it beautiful. Katie stayed in New Greenfield for the rest of her life. She never returned to Voth Prime, though Danny came to visit her regularly. She watched as the reforms spread across Vothar space and beyond. She saw the clan system gradually transform into something more democratic. Sometimes young people would come to New Montana to meet her. Students studying government, journalists writing stories, activists looking for inspiration. She would invite them to sit on her porch and tell them the truth. It wasn't quick, she would say. It wasn't easy. There were times we wanted to quit, times when it seemed impossible. But we kept going because we had to, because giving up would mean those deaths were for nothing. She would point toward the hills where old Greenfield had stood. The Vothar shrine was gone now. In its place was a memorial, a simple stone marker listing the names of the 203 people who had died. They were just regular people, Katie would say. Farmers, teachers, shopkeepers. They didn't want to be heroes or change the galaxy. They just wanted to live their lives in peace.